So I've been looking forward to doing this video for a while, and I finally got the research and junk finished, so here it is. A video on Bible code. What is Bible code? Is it real? We'll start by looking at its origins, and then we'll talk about what it can predict and how it works, and finally, we'll look at its efficacy. Let's get into it. So what is Bible code? When I tell you, you aren't going to believe it's real. You're going to think it's a troll, but I assure you it's 100% real. People actually legitimately believe this stuff, and they live their lives by it. So what is it? Bible code is basically a system of taking letters spaced a certain distance apart and deriving a secret hidden message from it. So say you take the book of Genesis, and you pull out every 22nd letter from the entire book. Then you put them together and you get a sentence that predicts Hitler's rise to power, for example. Kent Hovind is a pretty big fan and buys the whole thing, hook, line, and sinker. Honestly, it isn't a short leap from religious fanatic who believes every word of the Bible is inspired by God to religious fanatic who believes God put secret messages in the Bible. Kent Hovind is quoted as saying, "All the computers in the world couldn't possibly write a book where the text means something as you read it, but also there's a hidden code." I beg to differ, Kent. Even computers from the 1990s were capable of doing that kind of thing. You'd be surprised what they were capable of. Eliyahu Rips and Doron Whitstone were the first people to write software to find patterns in the Bible. Or at least the first people of note. They did a formal test called the Great Rabbis Experiment in 1985, where they searched for the names and dates of birth and death for a number of rabbis in the Hebrew text. And in 1994, Statistical Science, a peer-reviewed journal, published a paper they wrote entitled The Equidistant Letter Sequences in Genesis. But it was really popularized by a book named The Bible Code, written by Michael Dronson in 1997. It was a bestseller, and I can understand why it would be a bestseller. It's really interesting. A complete conspiracy theory, but religious fanatics seem to flock to conspiracy theories, so it's right up their alley. So what do they claim it can predict? Before I talk about that, I just want to point out something interesting. I don't know how you guys feel about Ouija boards, but I was taught they came straight from Satan. If you're even around one, Satan could get into your house or even your mind. My mom told me stories about people going insane and committing suicide after using a Ouija board. I heard stories of people asking what God's name is, and then the lens on the Ouija board flying off the board straight for the questioner's face. So much superstition surrounding these things. But on further investigation, you'll find that when things are spelled out on a Ouija board, they almost always have the same spelling mistakes and grammatical errors as the people who have their hands on the lens. Jehovah's Witnesses are really superstitious, come to find out. And overcoming that superstitious attitude took me a long time. Just a little scientific investigation can completely crush any ridiculous idea. Now back to Bible code. What do people claim it predicts? Well, for one thing, they claim that it predicts that Edison invented the light bulb, which is interesting because Edison didn't invent the light bulb. Once again, finding something that reaffirms what they already believed and leveraging that as proof that it works, even if it's not true. For the record, my boy Humphrey Davy invented the light bulb, not Thomas Edison. However, his bulbs burned up really quickly. Edison decided to turn his attention toward figuring out how to prevent bulbs from burning the material to a crisp when enough electricity is passed through it to make it glow. So, not Edison, not by a long shot. Bulbs existed for decades before Edison turned his attention to trying to improve an existing product. So Bible code fails on that count. Interesting that Bible code predicted a widely believed falsehood though. You'd think God would make sure he got the details right if he planned on predicting stuff at all. So what else does it predict? They claim it predicts the assassination of an Israeli prime minister, the Gulf War, the collision of a comet with Jupiter, Trump winning the election, the rise of Hitler and the torture of the Jews, 9/11, the moon landing, and Newton's discovery of gravity. There goes my monetization. Just say the word Hitler and it goes straight down the tubes. Anyways, according to what I guess you'd call them Bible codists, according to Bible codists, it also predicted a number of other historical events, but nobody ever picked up on the predictions until after they've already happened. How convenient, right? To be a proper prediction, it needs to be detailed and it needs to predict before the event occurs, at the very least. That being said, some quote-unquote researchers claim they found a Bible code that predicts the world will end in the next decade. And what happens if that prediction falls on its face? Nothing. They'll forget it ever happened and we'll move on with our lives. They'll just bury it. Okay, so how does it work exactly? Well, usually when people do the Bible code thing, they're reading from the Torah in Hebrew. They look for a pattern called an equidistant letter sequence by skipping a certain number of letters and then combining the results. So in the sentence, Sally said to Summer, positions identify the octopod phylum. You can get the phrase stupid fool if you start from the first letter and read each fifth letter, ignoring spaces and punctuation. And of course, these codes are found by working backwards from your conclusion. If you want to find the word Hitler, you put it into software and it'll run through a full copy of the Torah. Then it scans through the entirety of the text for the letters H-I-T-L-E-R, where the letters are equally spaced out. So you'd have H, then 22 letters, then I, then 22 more, then T, then 22 more, like that. The software will run through a bunch of sequences until it finds an instance of it. Originally it was done by hand, which is how it was first discovered, but sometimes computers make it so much easier to believe ridiculous things. If you want to do it by hand, then you have to lay out your letters in something of a word search kind of format. Then start circling words, just like you would in a word search. The shorter distance between each letter, the more statistically improbable it is, which is something religious people like to parade around a lot in relation to other things too. What are the odds humans evolved? It's just too big of a coincidence for me, says the religious nutcase. Of course, they don't care that the 12 chapters before and after the secret code is complete nonsense. All they care about is the fact that they found this hidden message in this book that they revere so highly. It can't be a coincidence. I mean, God wrote it, right? So that's how Bible code works. But there are a few problems with it. It should be obvious that this is completely ridiculous, but the best way to debunk something is to come with evidence. Though logically speaking, we don't have to prove anything here. They haven't sufficiently proven their claim. But that's fine. Let's talk about it. The first problem is the fact that the words are chosen before setting out to find the prediction. They pick a word or phrase they're looking for and have a computer analyze the text to find it. There's no consistent number of letters to skip. If you could skip 666 letters from the beginning of the Bible to the end, and there was no nonsense in there anywhere, it actually gave you real legitimate predictions, it might be different. It doesn't work like that at all. The Hebrew alphabet has 22 letters in it. You're bound to find some emerging pattern in any random group of letters when your alphabet is that small. Not only that, but we seek patterns. We evolved that way, much as people like to deny it. If we take the words monkey, gun, and sadness, we can all fit those words into a real-world event, even though the situation we're thinking of involves a gorilla, not a monkey. And obviously confirmation bias plays a massive role in this whole thing. They ignore the misses and magnify the hits. Make a big deal out of it when they find a word or phrase that fits. I'm a little embarrassed that it's necessary to address this subject in the first place. I know it seems like a troll, but there are actually people out there who believe it. Lots of people, in fact. Kent Hovind endorses it, or he did last I checked, which means his followers are probably on board by default. It has to be addressed. An author by the name of Brendan McKay wrote a book called Solving the Bible Code Puzzle, which talked about lots of problems with it. The guy took the time to go through Moby Dick to find predictions in the same way Bible codists find them in the Bible. An example prediction he found was that Moby Dick predicted the death of Princess Diana. Robert E. Cass, head of Department of Statistics at Carnegie Mellon University, wrote the introduction to Brendan McKay's book. He said, "One of the fundamental teachings in statistical training is that probability distributions can generate seemingly surprising outcomes much more frequently than naive intuition might suggest. Experienced statisticians have long been skeptical of claims based on human perception of extraordinary occurrences. Now that computer programs are widely available, there are wonderful new possibilities for discovering misleading patterns." When the article Equidistant Letter Sequences in the Book of Genesis by Whitstone, Rips, and Rosenberg was examined for statistical science, none were convinced that the authors had found something genuinely amazing. Instead, what remained intriguing was the difficulty of pinpointing the cause, presumed to be some flaw in their procedure that produced such apparently remarkable findings. Thus, in introducing that paper, I wrote that it was offered to readers as a challenging puzzle. Unfortunately, many people outside our own profession interpreted the paper as a stamp of scientific approval. Then he said, "However, even though the referees had thought carefully about possible sources of error, no one we asked was willing to spend the time and effort required to reanalyze the data carefully and independently. Rather, we published a paper in the hope that someone would be motivated to devote substantial energy to figuring out what was going on, and that the discipline of statistics would be advanced through the identification of subtle problems that can arise in this kind of pattern recognition." End quote. So that's what he had to say. But an entire religious study spawned from this one research paper. Regardless of their intentions in publishing the paper, regardless of how ridiculous it might seem to them, for people to believe it had some kind of supernatural backing, it still sent people down a new, even deeper rabbit hole of belief without evidence. It's like that one doctor, Andrew Wakefield, who wrote a BS paper on vaccines causing autism. No matter what his intentions were going in, no matter how many times he'd been debunked, he still killed far too many people by spreading misinformation. It's a dangerous thing, and disseminating information should be taken very, very seriously. You never know what kind of damage a little misinformation could cause. Anyways, that's all I've got for you. Follow me on Patreon, Discord, all social media, and check out my science channel and my podcast. And don't forget the secret link of the day. Thanks for watching, guys.